Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of the UK, has woken up to a few punches to the gut in the press this week. Today, his eldest son, Ewan, blasted his father's decades-long platform of pushing for higher education in an op-ed, calling a college degree irrelevant and suggesting some sort of retraining for lower-skilled workers. That following our next guest eviscerating the former Prime Minister in his own op-ed for RT.com for suggesting kids in the UK should return to school amid this pandemic. George Galloway, veteran UK MP, is now joining us to weigh in. So George, first, let's talk about the Blairs. I don't know what's going on in that household, but the 36-year-old son of the former Prime Minister, a private school educated lad his whole life, also a Yale graduate, which is an Ivy League university here stateside. Aren't his calls for dismantling and reassembling the education system in the UK a bit tone deaf and glib, given all of this young man's privilege?
Well, it's taken 36 years for me to be able to say I agree with Mr. Blair, at least up to a point, Manila. I myself left school at 16. I went to work making tires in a factory. I'm a graduate of the University of Life, and it hasn't done me any harm. And I have long been of the view that the remorseless increase in the number of people getting degrees only led to the cheapening of the currency. And the fact is we have far too many sociologists and gender studies graduates and, worst of all, media studies graduates, and not enough tradespeople, tradesmen and women. Not enough mathematicians, not enough scientists, not enough engineers, not enough people that can hammer in a nail straight or even change a tire on their car when they get a puncture. I mean, and that's flawed. That's really a flawed system.
Right. Every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. There are two reasons for it. The first of them is economic. People are trying to work out, how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century? How do we do that, given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week, as the recent turmoil is demonstrating? How do we do that? The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out, how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities, while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle? The problem is they're trying to meet the future by doing what they did in the past. And on the way, they're alienating millions of kids who don't see any purpose in going to school. When we went to school, we were kept there with a story, which was if you worked hard and did well and got a college degree, you would have a job. Our kids don't believe that. And they're right not to, by the way. You're better having a degree than not, but it's not a guarantee anymore. And particularly not if the route to it marginalizes most of the things that you think are important about yourself. Some people say we have to raise standards as if this is a breakthrough. You know, like, really, yes, we should. Why would you lower them? You know, I mean, I haven't come across an argument that persuades me of lowering them. But raising them, of course we should raise them. The problem is that the current system of education was designed and conceived and structured for a different age. It was conceived in the intellectual culture of the Enlightenment and in the economic circumstances of the Industrial Revolution. Before the middle of the 19th century, there were no systems of public education. Not really. I mean, you could get educated by Jesuits, you know, if you had the money. But public education, paid for from taxation, compulsory to everybody and free at the point of delivery, that was a revolutionary idea. And many people objected to it. They said it's not possible for many street kids, working class children, to benefit from public education. They're incapable of learning to read and write, and why are we spending time on this? So there's also built into it a whole series of assumptions about social structure and capacity. It was driven by an economic imperative of the time, but running right through it was an intellectual model of the mind, which was essentially the Enlightenment view of intelligence. That real intelligence consists in the capacity for a certain type of deductive reasoning, and a knowledge of the classics originally, what we come to think of as academic ability. And this is deep in the gene pool of public education, that there are really two types of people, academic and non-academic, smart people and non-smart people. And the consequence of that is that many brilliant people think they're not, because they've been judged against this particular view of the mind. So we have twin pillars, economic and intellectual. And my view is that this model has caused chaos in many people's lives. It's been great for some. There have been people who have benefited wonderfully from it. But most people have not. Instead, they suffer this. This is the modern epidemic, and it's as misplaced and it's as fictitious. This is the plague of ADHD. Now, this is a map of the incidence of ADHD in America, or prescriptions for ADHD. Don't mistake me here. I don't mean to say there is no such thing as attention deficit disorder. I'm not qualified to say if there is such a thing. I know that a great majority of psychologists and paediatricians think there is such a thing. But it's still a matter of debate. What I do know for a fact is it's not an epidemic. These kids are being medicated as routinely as we had our tonsils taken out, and on the same whimsical basis and for the same reason, medical fashion. Our children are living in the most intensely stimulating period in the history of the earth. They're being besieged with information and calls for their attention from every platform, computers, from iPhones, from advertising holdings, from hundreds of television channels. And we're penalizing them now for getting distracted. From what? Boring stuff at school, for the most part. It seems to me it's not a coincidence totally that the incidence of ADHD has risen in parallel with the growth of standardized testing.
Let's explore that a little more. I mean, to this man's credit, to the younger son's credit here, Mr. Blair, barring the source of the comments, he does have a point, given that in many countries, like my own, here in the U.S., we have scores of young adults saddled with $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 in debt after graduating university with some very unmarketable degrees, some of which you mentioned. They are even unable to fix a leaky toilet in their own home if they had to deal with that. Americans are no longer producers in the way they used to be. Perhaps UN wasn't the best messenger for trade schools, but what about that? What about trade schools? I know we need them here in the U.S.
Well, trade schools are a thing of the past here, as are evening classes, as are people improving their skills in work. I think that, as it has been for me, education should be a lifelong thing, not something that you do for 3 years and saddle up that giant debt and then come out into a marketplace which increasingly has no place for you and does not even pay you enough money actually to repay your student debt, which therefore hangs potentially around your neck more or less forever. And in our case, maybe also in yours, what it leads to is relying on other people, other countries' labor forces to do your jobs. If you're looking for a bricklayer or a joiner or a glazier or a plumber here in Britain, well, you've grown used to calling the Polish guy, calling the Romanian or the Bulgarian guy. Well, he's going home now that we have left the European Union.
红色是表示你的专注力显示得很高。
Teachers at this primary school in China
蓝色是走神了，
know exactly when someone isn't paying attention.
白色就是你可能跟网络还没有连接好。
These headbands measure each student's level of concentration. The information is then directly sent to the teacher's computer and to parents. China has big plans to become a global leader in artificial intelligence. It has enabled a cashless economy where people make purchases with their faces. A giant network of surveillance cameras with facial recognition helps police monitor citizens. Meanwhile, some schools offer glimpses of what the future of high-tech education in the country might look like.
做出选择吧 ，Good job。
Classrooms have robots that analyze students' health and engagement levels. Students wear uniforms with chips that track their locations. There are even surveillance cameras that monitor how often students check their phones or yawn during classes. These gadgets have alarmed Chinese netizens. But schools say it wasn't hard for them getting parental consent to enroll kids into what is one of the world's largest experiments in AI education. A program that's supposed to boost students' grades while also feeding powerful algorithms.
为了就是国家的这个研究呀、发展呀，我觉得是没有问题的。
The government has poured billions of dollars into the project, bringing together tech giants, startups, and schools. We got exclusive access to a primary school a few hours outside of Shanghai. To see firsthand how AI tech is being used in the classroom. For this 5th grade class, the day begins with putting on a brainwave sensing gadget. Students then practice meditating.
现在想象我的眉心有一缕柔和的光芒绽放。
The device is made in China and has 3 electrodes, 2 behind the ears and 1 on the forehead. These sensors pick up electrical signals sent by neurons in the brain. The neural data is then sent in real time to the teacher's computer. So while students are solving math problems, a teacher can quickly find out who's paying attention and who's not.
说明这段时间他是有点在那走神的。
A report is then generated that shows how well the class was paying attention. It even details each student's concentration level at 10-minute intervals. It's then sent to a chat group for parents.
就是他可以看到每个人的评分。
The reports are detailed, but whether these devices really work and what they exactly measure isn't as clear. We were curious if the headbands could actually measure concentration, so one of our reporters tried on the device.
This is a new technology with still fairly little research behind it.
Theodore Zanto is a neuroscientist at the University of California, San Francisco. He was surprised to learn that this tech, called electroencephalography, also known as EEG, is being used in the classroom on children. It's usually used by doctors in hospitals and labs.
EEG is very susceptible to artifacts, and so if you are itchy or just a little fidgety, or the EEG wasn't set up properly so that the electrodes didn't have a good contact, affects the signal.
Despite the chances for false readings, teachers told us the headbands have forced students to become more disciplined.
上课回答我的问题，就是他们的声音会比平常更响亮。
Teachers say the students now pay better attention during class, and that has made them study harder and achieve higher scores.
上课认真听讲，作业做的基本上是全对的。
But not all students are as enthusiastic.
就是自己的脑子脑筋课，我感觉这里有个硬的。
This 5th grader, whom we caught dozing off in class, told us his parents punish him for low attention scores. And that kind of data adds a new kind of pressure for students.
想啊，如果在一次考试全班人都考了95分以上，就你考了一个85，你会不会感觉你有一个
Companies we interviewed said the data can go to government-funded research projects. We spoke to parents who were unclear about where the data ended up, and they didn't seem to care too much. Santos says there's likely no privacy protection at all.
In a classroom, if you're trying to make an assessment of an individual student, you really can't anonymize it.
Experts and citizens alike are sounding alarms about various aspects of the country's huge push into artificial intelligence. These classrooms are laboratories for future generations.
Give us, the best case scenario. You've heard this metaphor of the hammer and the dance. The dance being now you start opening up the economy, and through a kind of moderate amount of social distancing, you are able to achieve. What will we be able to achieve? What's the good case scenario?
The best case is you pick the high value activities like school, manufacturing, construction, and figure out a way to do those with kind of masks and distancing. You know, in the school, you don't want the hallways to have tons of kids all at once, or the lunchroom. And then you can see, are those schools a source of infection spreading up into the elderly, which then, you know, would cause some level of mortality. I'm hopeful
Bill,
there will be a way.
Can I just ask you about schools, because everyone is so curious and worried about this. You have 3 kids. You know how schools work. I mean, lots of people crowded together in classrooms and dormitories, in hallways. That is almost the definition of school. How do you get it going?